Side, State Fights, and Bill of Rights. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul MED. We are Threefift's High School in these United States, and today is October 14th, 2020. And on this date in history in 1322, 7,690 years ago, Robert the Bruce helped Scotland get their independence. Man, I really realized that, Dan. Sorry about that.
Okay, so they're putting together the Constitution, trying to put together some type of form of government that keeps everyone together and makes everyone happy. And I think we all know that that's pretty impossible, but they actually end up doing a pretty decent job unless you are a minority or poor or from a small state. But other than that, it works out great for everybody. Okay, so let's start off here at the top. Okay, so the Virginia or large state plan, this would create a new government with with three branches and two houses of government. Uh, and large states would get the most benefit because representation's based on population. So what that means is we have 13 colonies. The two biggest ones are Virginia and New York. And one of the things that neither of the states liked during the Articles of Confederation is they had the same amount of representation as Rhode Island and Delaware. Delaware, which had somewhere around 55,000 people, had the same representation as Virginia, that had about 5 million people. 3 million of those were white and 2 million were slave. But, you know, depending on how you want to count it, 3 to 5 million people versus 60,000, it just isn't fair. On the other hand, though, the small states said, well, we want to still matter. So the New Jersey plan was an attempt to just try and fix what was wrong with the Articles of Confederation, make the central government a little bit stronger, but still have equal representation with one house of Congress. Okay, which, anyway. Sorry, I'm trying to move. There we go. So you have two different groups here. You have the Anti-Federalist. These are people that are against any type of strong central federal national government. Sam Patrick, man, I just made them get married with first names. Sam Adams and Patrick Henry were all about states' rights, small farms, a poor farmer, the people that had not reached a level of success that people attribute to Americans. Okay, the debtors, and basically the main thing behind Sam Adams is he wants to have a a Bill of Rights, but he also wants to keep everything centralized. Now, the Federalist. So here's a big thing for you: the word federalism, uh, centralism, or nationalism are all the same thing. It's all talking about a strong central government, a strong federal government, a strong national government. All of those things kind of go hand in hand. These are people like Washington, James Madison, and John Marshall, who we'll talk a lot more about later. Okay. And one of the agreements that they made was that the to make changes to the Confederation now would take 9 out of the 13 colonies, so no longer unanimous. Now, the problem with that is you still want to keep everyone together. So, James Madison, he writes the Constitution. He's known as the father of the Constitution. Okay. And so he's putting together all this information, but there's a major problem. You've got to bring everyone together. So we have what's called the Connecticut Compromise or the Great Compromise. Now, which one could it be on the test and quiz? I don't remember, so you need to know it both ways. So based on this, they took some of the best aspects of both the Virginia plan, New Jersey plan, and some of the other plans that were floating around. The House of Representatives would be based on population. Okay, so the number of people in your state would affect the number of votes that you have. And right now, the way that it's set up, California, I think, has 45 members in the House of Representatives, and Texas has 38, I believe. If I'm wrong, then I won't be right. And all those numbers could change now that the census is hit. Okay, so they would be selected by voters, and they would present tax bills because they represent the largest percentage of people. The Senate would have equal representation selected by state legislatures. Now, that system's different now, but that's how it was done in the beginning. Okay, so by the way, look at James Madison. He's so 5'4". It's not often that there's great people in history that I just tower over with my monstrous 5'6", but he's one of them. By the way, Napoleon was really about 5'6", but they did measurements a little bit different in France, so they record him as 5'2" because apparently feet were different between England and France. I don't know. Awkward. So the Electoral College, this is a system for electing the president. This is still the system that we're running today, and the way that this works is the candidate with the most votes in each state gets all of the votes for that state. Okay? So most votes in each state gets all of the votes for that state. Okay? So you win by one vote in California, you get every vote in California. And this has been one of those things where it made a major deal, especially in the state of Florida. That's how George Bush was elected. And it's how Donald Trump won, even though he lost the popular vote by 4 million votes. Okay? So if there and by the way, you have to win what's called a majority. Okay. Now people get a little bit confused between majority and plurality. Okay. Plurality means the most. Okay. So you know, if there's three candidates, one you know, has 50 vote or one has 49 votes, one has 35 votes, and then one has 16 votes. Well, if you're going by plurality, the person with 49 votes would win. But if you're going by majority, they would need at least 51. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So if no one has a majority, then it's decided in the House. And then in the House of Representatives, every state gets a vote, and that's how they decide until they come to a solution. Okay. Federalism. This is dividing government power between central, state, and local governments. Okay, so here's another use for the word federalism and federal. And I'm sorry that I didn't make this up. I would call it something different, but that's kind of how our federal government works. There's some state laws, there's some national laws, and then there's some local laws. That's called federalism. Okay, so by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but the Connecticut Compromise or Great Compromise was put together by Roger Sherman. Roger Sherman's someone who should probably get more publicity for what he did as a founding father, but I think a lot of it is ruined by this moronic thing that he does. Okay, so the Three-Fifths Compromise is proposed by Roger Sherman and James Wilson, and they said, and so there's a big debate on House of Representatives and deciding how many people each state gets. Well, the South wants to count their slaves as part of their population for representation, and the North says you don't give them any personal rights, so they don't count. Then the argument is, well, children don't count either, or you're counting. No, actually, it was the other way around. Children count in the North, so why should they count and our slaves don't? It Again, for people talking about freedom and equality and all this crap, it doesn't make sense. So if you're trying to make sure everything makes sense, you're in a losing battle right now. Well, anyway, Three-Fifths Compromise said 5 slaves equal 3 people for representation and taxes. That doesn't mean that if you're a slave, you have 3/5 of rights. That's just not the case. So the Federalist Papers or the Federalist, these are both the same thing. And so these three men together, you have you have Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. Okay, James Madison, fourth president. He was the uh, he was also the person who wrote the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton fought in the American Revolution and helped create the economic system that the United States, well, the foundation for what we have today. John Jay was a experienced diplomat, helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris of 1783, and he also will serve as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So anyway, they write 85 essays that summarize the arguments for ratification for the Constitution. Okay, so these are the Federalist or the Federalist Papers. The majority of them are written by James Madison. So let's talk about separation of powers and checks and balances. Okay, this is an attempt to try and prevent one of the three branches of government from becoming too powerful. Okay, the biggest fear was with the executive branch. Okay, so the executive branch enforces the law and they're led by a president. Okay, so law enforcement falls under executive branch. So basically, the police are part of the executive branch. Okay, they appoint federal judges and they can veto or reject legislation. So that's kind of the checks and balances the executive branch has over the other two. Now, the legislative has to do with laws, so they make laws in two houses of Congress. Okay, they have to approve of all appointments of the presidential positions, like all the cabinet positions have to be approved by Congress, and all of the Supreme Court nominees have to be approved by Congress. Okay, the judicial branch, their job is to interpret the law. What does this law mean? Who is protected by this? Or, if this person's been jailed for this or had their property taken away, is this legal? So they set laws or create laws through precedents and rulings. Um, they will preside over any type of impeachment trial of the president, vice president, cabinet, or even members of Congress. Uh, They can also say the president isn't doing their job right and have them removed under those grounds as well. And they can strike down any laws from Congress if they feel that they aren't constitutional. Okay, so the fight for ratification. Okay, the Federalists promised to add a Bill of Rights. Now, if you look at the map on the left, what you're going to see is the green is the people that are against the Constitution. And so that is New York, a big part of Virginia, and a big part of Pennsylvania, and a big part of Massachusetts. So some of the most populous parts of the nation are against the Constitution. The place where it's kind of a tie, those are some backwater areas of some of the southern states. Okay, so don't get the impression that everyone was in favor of the Constitution of the United States, because they weren't. Okay, so the Bill of Rights, this is not part of the original Constitution, but it's added within the first year afterwards. And the whole thing for this is to protect people from items not mentioned in the Constitution. This is one of the demands of Sam Adams and several people that felt that the Constitution didn't protect enough rights. So, an amendment is really a system for changing the Constitution, and there were 10 of those included, 10 changes to the Constitution included in the Bill of Rights. Now, to pass an amendment, there's a two-step process, and that's proposal and ratification. Okay, so if two-thirds of Congress votes on an amendment, okay, so two-thirds of the House, two-thirds of the Senate vote on an amendment, then it goes through the proposal part. Now, for ratification, three-fourths of the state legislatures or the states would have to vote in favor of it for it to become an amendment. So not every amendment that's been passed by Congress has made it and to the point where it's an official amendment. One of the last one of those to fail was the Equal Rights Amendment, which fell 3 states short of being passed around 1981. Okay, so that's kind of been sitting on the back burner. There's been some push to try and get that passed to protect equal rights between men and women, but it hasn't been done. Now, this does not have to be done by Congress because 2/3 of the states could also call a constitutional convention to propose an amendment. Okay, so it doesn't have to be done just by Congress. It can be initiated at a different level. So let's talk about these, and I'm going to try and do this pretty quickly so that there's no confusion. The First Amendment is freedom of speech. Now, one thing here: freedom of speech does not give you the right to say anything you want. It protects your right to make uh, political statements. Okay, so you can't legally run into, you know, a black church and start shooting. Well, you can't shoot either, but shouting out racial slurs. You can't do that. That's disturbing the peace. So it doesn't protect that type of speech, but any type of political idea you have the right to make. Freedom of the press, uh, the right for the press to operate, tell stories, try and find the truth. That helped take down one president, and we might have the same journalist take down two, which is really odd. The right to assemble, so you can get together and meet. Even hate groups like the KKK have the right to get together, but they don't have the right to take any type of activity afterwards. We have freedom of religion and the right to petition. So, here, let me hold right there for just one moment. The Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. This gives you the right to have a gun. This was in part due to people's duties in the militia. Sorry, this is my life. We get those, and then I'll have another one here in about a minute and a half. Okay, or about a minute. Anyway, the Third Amendment is no quartering of troops, and this goes back to the Quartering Act by the British during the war, that you don't have to keep troops in your house. You can't be required to do that. The Fourth Amendment is unreasonable searches and seizures. So if they're going to search your stuff, they have to have reasonable doubt in order to do that, and they can't seize it unless they have, you know, reasonable cause to seize anything. The Fifth Amendment has a couple of different things on this. Double jeopardy is one of those. You cannot be tried for the same crime twice. Uh, so you can't be tried for the same crime twice. Uh, you can be sued in both the criminal and civil court, but if they didn't have double jeopardy, you could be charged for a crime, tried for it, and then right after you're found not guilty, tried for it, and you would spend all your money in attorney fees proving that you didn't do it. Okay. Due process of law, that they have to go through all the steps. If they don't, then you can be, uh, your verdict could be thrown out, or your case might be thrown out. Okay. It also gives you the right to not incriminate yourself. So you can't be called, they can't force you to be called to the stand to testify. And, one of your answers, if it will prove that you're guilty, you're not allowed to do that. Eminent domain also allows them to take away property if it is not, if it hinders the area that you live in. So if they need to build a major highway, they can build it through your property through the law of eminent domain. When they built the Cowboy Stadium about 10 years ago, they built that under eminent domain as well, and forced people in Arlington to sell their homes. 29 homes were sold, but 27 of the 29 were all owned by one man. He did pretty well. The Sixth Amendment is speedy trial. This keeps you from being held in jail for 10, 15 years, like they were being done in admiralty courts. And so now they have to try and get you in pretty fast. Now, that can still take you 18 months to go to court. Okay. The Seventh Amendment guarantees the right to a trial of a jury of your peers. That goes back to, once again, the admiralty courts in Halifax, where a single judge decided everything. Now, you do have the right, that if you want, you can have your case tried just in front of the judge and not by a jury. But that's pretty unusual. The Eighth Amendment, no excessive bail. So you get pulled over for speeding, they decide to arrest you. They can't say $1 gazillion for you to get out. You know. Now we can argue the merits of whether or not gazillion's an actual number, but I'll say this: with an infinite number of numbers, eventually every every one of them would have some type of name, and if you went far enough, you could probably have a cajillion. Okay, that's my personal theory. Cruel and unusual punishment. They can't cut off your arms and legs, castrate you, blind you, anything like that. The Ninth Amendment, it promises individual rights not mentioned in the Constitution. So just because it doesn't say in the Constitution, you do have certain protections. And last, this is a pretty important one. It's the idea of federalism. All powers not in the Constitution are reserved for the states. So the states can decide anything not explicitly decided by the national or federal government. This brings us to the end of today. Uh, I hope everyone's having a great day. Don't do illegal stuff. I'll talk to you soon. This is Doug Dell. Peace and love.